Welcome to Modern Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping you feel better about your finances. I'm your host, Jim Grace, and I'll be your guide as we discuss the psychology of money and explore the emotional aspects that shape our financial decisions and how we feel about them. A quick note before we start, although I do hope that you find the information on this show to be helpful, in no way are any of these discussions to be taken as specific financial advice. Please do your own research and talk to your own advisors, especially when making important financial decisions. All right, everybody, welcome to Modern Financial Wellness. My guest today is Jeff Bernier. Jeff is a financial planner. He's the president and founder of Tandem Growth Financial Advisors. He's also the author of the book, The Money and Meaning Journey, a guide to clarity, financial confidence, and joy. And he also hosts the Money and Meaning podcast. Jeff, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Likewise. So I've been looking forward to this conversation for a number of reasons. One is that we're both alumni of the Shaping Wealth BTBA program,
right,
which is where we originally connected,
right.
And found that we share a lot of similar interests when it comes to financial well-being overall. So I've been looking forward to catching up with you on a number of those things. And also, you've been in the business for a long time, 35 plus years. What is the exact number now?
I think it's 37 years.
37.
Now. Yeah.
So 37. You've been at this a long time. So I always enjoy talking to folks that have that kind of depth of experience. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of iterations and evolutions of the business and the work that you do with clients. So it's always a pleasure to talk to folks like you. So again, I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, well, happy to be here, and experience just means I made a lot of mistakes, so that's good. I can share some of my mistakes.
Amen. So hopefully we'll share some of those, both yours and mine, along the way, and people can not make those and just expedite their own process a little bit.
That's right.
And skip along. Yeah, great. I wanted to chat with you about the book a little bit. And you open the book and you get right to the point, in my opinion. You share a story about your mother's passing,
right,
and a connection you made to your father's retirement.
Right.
Would you mind sharing that story with us a little bit to kind of kick us off? Because I think it just got to the point of what we're going to talk about, which is purpose and meaning and finances and how that all connects together.
Yeah, I love sharing that. It's not, it was a difficult time in certainly my father's journey. But so my dad is, and I wrote maybe this in the book, and I know I've written it in some blog posts. My dad was George Bailey. If you know who George Bailey is, he was, from the movie, the classic Jimmy Stewart movie, A Wonderful Life. George Bailey was the hometown kid that became the savings and loan, running the savings and loan. And he had all these dreams about going all these other places, but he never got to go because he was taking care of the people of Bedford Falls, I believe it was. So that's my dad. My dad was the George Bailey of a small town in South Georgia. And he loved his work. He loved his community. He loved his customers. And he was a steward of their plans in many, many ways. And so in 2003, interestingly, about the time I was starting my company, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and she had a 2-year battle with cancer that she ultimately lost in this life. And early on in that process, she had some surgery to try to cut out and deal with a lot of the cancer tissue that was in her body. And at the end of the surgical procedure, we met with the doctor, and he said, look, I did what I could do, but there's a lot more I couldn't do. And we didn't get the sense that he felt like it was all that successful, quite frankly. And I just remember getting back to my dad's house with him that night. And obviously he was very upset, as I was. And I just remember him sort of slamming a door as he was getting a glass out of the cabinet or something. And he just kind of broke down and said, this is one of the 3 worst days of my life. And
understandably so.
Yeah. And I can certainly relate to that because it was a really bad day. And so I asked him, I said, well, Dad, what were this is a bad day. What are the other two? And he said, the day that my mother died, my grandmother, his mother, he said, the day my mother died, which I could certainly relate to at that point because I was facing that possibility with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing he said shocked me. And he said the other day he equated with the day his mother died and that day of a bad surgical outcome for the love of his life. He said it was the day he retired. And that just saddened me in a way and had a huge impact on me for the rest of my career.
I'm sure.
I was already working in a mindset to try to help people more holistically, but that
Mm-hmm.
certainly raised the bar for me on why retirement should be a joyful time. Changing context to do new and exciting and different types of things. So it really just had an impact on me. And so and I tell a story similar to that with my parents because they had a great life and they had a great life together. And he had been retired for a few years. But just to equate that day with the day he retired, that he had nothing
Right.
to retire to, saddened me.
Mm-hmm.
So that was
Yeah.
the story that I think you were alluding to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was curious, you mentioned you were at a point in your career where you were thinking about working with clients more holistically. You had been in the industry for a while at that point as
Right.
an advisor. When you say holistically, was it kind of the common sense of holistic financial planning, or were you thinking about meaning and purpose at that time as well? Or was this kind of a light bulb moment for you that maybe there's more to what we can bring to the table as advisors when we're working on these things with clients?
So when I said holistically, I guess what I was really meaning was not holistic in terms of the various disciplines of wealth management. So
Hmm.
we were already doing that. I mean, we were doing
Right.
tax advice, we were doing cash flow planning, we were doing estate counsel, we were doing risk management, we were looking at portfolio design. So we were already doing holistic
All the stuff.
technical planning. I guess when I used the term holistic at that point, I guess I meant the heart journey as opposed to
Right.
just the head journey. Because
Hmm.
and so we were already totally engaged with helping people create the means to go live a great life. But I really got motivated to help people get clearer on what a great life looks like
Hmm.
so that we could really understand what gives a meaning and purpose and what do they value as much as how do we create the capacity to go do it. So
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
always felt we've been in the capacity business. We've always been in the business of capacity, but I wanted
Hmm.
to have deeper conversations to try to encourage people. Now we're not therapists and, so we only go to a certain level, but I just know that the goal, what I wanted to do is do a deeper dive in really what matters
Hmm.
and, and,
Hmm.
and then, and then try to tie the financial resources to what matters most in a deeper way.
Right. So that experience being shocked by your father when he compared retirement to your mother's passing, that was a big tailwind or motivation or validation for the thoughts and the practice you were building at the time. It really kind of
Correct.
solidified you that this is the way that we need to go to kind of shape our practice and really help people.
That's exactly right. And again, it was the time I was forming this company. So I was
Hmm.
already doing a lot of thinking about how do we serve clients in a more,
Hmm. Hmm.
robust and with more depth. But
Right.
it really motivated me to try to be better in
Right.
those areas.
Do you, one last question about that experience and your father in particular. So, one can maybe listen to that and be saddened by it and kind of create this link. Well, here's this gentleman that lost his wife and retired from this job, and he's feeling that those two things are connected and maybe didn't have some of the experiences that he wanted to have, or maybe didn't find what was meaningful to him or purposeful for him. But something that you had said earlier about him being so involved in the community and taking care of people, is there some, did he find some joy and passion and purpose in that, where it wasn't all bad? It was just he was so fulfilled by the work that he was doing that it meant so much to him when he could no longer fill that role in retirement.
Yeah, I really think it was that. I think he had an artificial finish line that he didn't quite get to in his head about when he wanted to retire.
Hmm.
I don't think he was able to retire exactly on his terms as to the timing. So that was part of what hurt him a little bit, I think.
Hmm.
But to answer your question, I mean, he's still finishing strong. He's 93 years old.
Oh, wow. Great.
He's in South Georgia. I just saw him last weekend. I get down there about once a month, and he's doing really well cognitively and physically. You know, he's got aches and pains of 93-year-old, but he's doing quite well. But I would say he did finish strong, but he didn't. I think it was just not as intentional because he became my mom's caregiver, obviously, for the
Hmm.
last couple of years of her life, and he's been a mentor and guide and leader to our family, certainly to my nephew, who he's really close to, who is raising a young family in the area. He was a mentoring guide to the next president of the bank and helped her.
Hmm.
And he was a guide and mentor to the current president of the bank. So he was still highly involved,
Hmm.
as well as in the community, but just not as I think he just got so much pleasure in being like I said, the helper to these farmers and small business owners and individuals in this small town.
Right.
And when he lost that, I felt like he lost something that was valuable to him. But he certainly replaced it with other things. So no,
That's
I
great.
think the book has a happy. I think his life is having a happy ending in the sense that
Sure.
he's been, I think, really content. In the last 20 years or so,
That's great.
that occurred.
Yeah. Well, it really gives us all pause, right?
Right.
And it really should, as we reflect on that, encourage all of us to go out and seek purposeful, meaningful work and connection to community and the things that I had you here to talk about today. So I appreciate you sharing that story. Again, I think it was fantastic that you were open about that and start the book with it because
Yeah.
I think you get right to the point,
Yeah.
right? That we're only here once and we need to, figure out what's important to us
Right.
and seek some purpose and meaning in life. So
Right.
as a transition to that, how do you think about purpose, meaning, fulfillment? From a high level, you created the book and kind of shaped it as a hero's journey. I noticed, which I love the idea of kind of thinking about our lives and telling our story. Where do we start if we want to start to figure out how to achieve some of these things?
Well, the thing I would two comments. The first one is back to the first story. I think the lesson to that, to me, one of the lessons, there's many, but one of the lessons to that is you've got to start working on these types of introspection before you transition to the next context. So you
Mm,
really, I mean, many people work really hard and save, and then they retire, and then all of a sudden they're no longer the executive vice president of sales. They're just another guy at Starbucks, right? So you've got to plan the transition beforehand, not just financially, but emotionally and
mm,
psychologically, and introspection about what gives you meaning, what gives you purpose, what gives you joy, and I think there's really three. I think there's really three aspects, and I talk about this in the middle part of the book. And the first one is you've just got to figure out who you are.
mm,
I use a lot of spiritual language in the book. You don't have to be a spiritual person, I think, to get stuff out of it, but you've got to figure out kind of, I heard Arthur Brooks recently say, what were you put on this earth to do? You've got to
mm,
answer that question for yourself. Arthur Brooks' two questions are, what were you put on this earth to do? And who or what would you die for? Now, those are hard
mm.
questions. Those aren't questions you're gonna answer, in a short. But I really do think you've got to take the proverbial walk in the woods,
Mhm.
and do some deep prayer, meditation, quiet time, thinking about what really matters. So that's the
Right.
core. You got to figure out who you are, and
Yeah.
obviously there.
And I love that point. Not to jump in,
Please,
but I
yeah,
love that point about giving it some time with introspection and whatever way, is right for you so that you don't end up in this situation where it's like, well, now what?
Right.
right? This other thing is gone and I haven't done that work. And now I'm facing a lot of uncertainty. And now, I've been forced to kind of do that work. It's much better, like everything in life, to do some planning and really give yourself some time with those, especially the bigger questions.
That's right. But but the other thing I would say about that though is, one of these questions about your core, which is what are your values and what are you passionate about and what are your gifts? Obviously you want to kind of get a handle on, what you love to do and you're great at doing. What Dan Sullivan at Strategic Coach called your unique ability, where passion and skill intersect. But oftentimes some of those things are placed in front of you because of a challenge, because of a something bad that's happened in your life, or something you judged as bad that's happened in your life. And this is the hero's journey, right? So we spend the first third of our lives getting, our first 15 or 20% of our lives getting educated and building capability. And then we spend the middle part of our lives building sort of a container of resources and assets and relationships and job titles and those kinds of things. And when we're in that phase, it's sometimes very difficult to go to the woods. I mean, you're busy just trying to, make it to the next meeting.
I was going to make a joke. There was no class in high school about that walk in the woods, right?
Well, and you're busy. I mean, I think you might have kids in sports and you're getting where they need to be. And, and you're so consumed with people you love and helping them and taking care of them and taking care of your employer, because you want to keep a job and a paycheck and the financial resources and your spouse. And I mean, so we're pulled in so many ways that in our society, it's very difficult, I think, to take the space. But that's what you have to do if you want to really uncover what's valuable to you. So the core is really that first thing. But again, as I mentioned, if you're diagnosed with a difficult medical situation, or you have a family member diagnosed with a difficult medical situation, or, your business fails and you become bankrupt, those are times where you don't worry as much about the minutia of the mundane. Because sometimes you've got to because as human beings, as we're on that path upward and we're building and we're trying to, accomplish worldly success, our ego does not allow us to take space. We want to be popular and we want to, achieve things. And those are all good things, but we don't change if things don't force us to change sometimes. So anyway, so the first thing I would say is you've just got to figure out who you are and what you believe and who you love and what matters. So you
mentioned Arthur Brooks. So it sounds like all of that, you need to make some space for it.
Correct.
Right? I think you mentioned being busy, and it's tough to do, but it's a very important part of, to use the term, a self-care routine, right? Carving out some white space for yourself so you can kind of sit with those questions. You mentioned Arthur Brooks and those two big questions that he poses. Is there any other work or any other reference, things to kind of point people to when they're in the woods, maybe as a roadmap or a map, so to speak, or any books or things you've come across that is useful there?
Yeah. And I borrowed a ton of it in my book, and I tried to cite it appropriately. And obviously I talked to the organizations. So there's a lot. So I went to something called the Halftime Institute, which is a Christian organization that does this with Christians and walks them through this exercise. I've got 3 exercises in the book that do some of it around the core aspects, getting clear about who you are. And so there's some great resources out there that are in the book. As a matter of fact, if your audience would like to go to jeffbernierauthor.com, there's some bonus material. And if you buy the book, you'll know what the bonus code word is, but I'm going to give it to you right now. If you just type in HERO, HERO, when it asks for the code, you can see a mini workbook that I put together as part of a workshop I used to do called the Money and Meaning Experience. And it asks some of these questions, and we'll give you some of these references as well that might be helpful.
And I really appreciate you being willing to put that out there. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up in this conversation is that the book is really, really practical. And I think far too often these days we're, challenging people to find purpose and meaning and figure out things like, what were you put on this earth to do, and who would you die for, and some of these other things that we talk about, but then we don't leave them with any tools or constructs or ways to go about figuring those things out. Right. So
Right.
there's, as you mentioned, a lot of stuff in the book. So thank you for that. And we'll make sure we post and link to all those things so people can check it out.
Yeah, there's great resources. So the Halftime Institute was one, but there are many others that are excellent. There's an organization called Encore. They've recently changed their name, so I'm drawing a blank on their name. They do a lot of stuff around second act employment and careers, but I think you got to do the work up front about your values and your purpose and who you are and what you believe. I use Simon Sinek's, start with why in the book a little bit. I mean, he's got a great TED talk that gives you the theme about figuring out your why. It doesn't go very deep on how to do it, but it does at least tee up why that's so important. So,
Right.
so that might be helpful.
Yeah, that's great.
So the first thing is really the core. What do you, what matters to you? What do you care about? Who are you? What are your gifts? I know in Shaping Wealth material, we talk a lot about, about the things that make us happy. And, we're happier when we're doing things we're good at. And so, capability matters a lot. So figuring out what you're good at and what you like to do. So that's that. So I think at the end of the day, in terms of meaning, the way I would leave it on the core is my experience is when you're doing something that brings you joy and meaning to others. I mean, that's kind of where you're going to get there. I know Mitch Anthony wrote a great book called The New Retire Mentality, which talks about some of these same themes many years ago. And he's got great resources as well. And I know he defined work. We talk about his definition of work is anything that provides value to others and meaning to me. And if you think about that definition, anything that brings value to others and meaning to me, by that definition, you never really have to retire. Now, you may do different things. You may not work for a paycheck, but you can create value for others and give meaning for you. And so what I have found is service to others is a place of great meaning, even if it's small. I mean, that could be service to your grandchildren. That could be a mentor to your grandchildren. That could be service to your golf buddy. I mean, it doesn't have to be, nonprofit going to work on a nonprofit or something. I mean, there's plenty of context. Right. And that's really the second thing. So the first thing was core, figuring out who you are and what you care about. The second thing is figuring out the context. In the book, I use sort of the theatrical theme. So you're finding the stage that you're going to perform on. And there can be many contexts, and I just alluded to some of them. Now, if there's one criticism about the book, it does point you a lot into external service. But I think a lot of that service does not have to be, as I mentioned, it does not have to be, with a nonprofit or.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say, I think it's, obviously, there's a lot of great causes where you can add value and find meaning. And you mentioned nonprofit, but context might be making a significant contribution to your team at the company that's doing great work more broadly and feeling really good about it. Right. So
no question about
it's applicable across a lot of different areas.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, I have a 20-year business plan at 61 years old, so my context is not in this role is not, I'm not planning on changing it for a long, long time, God willing. But so, no, I think the context can be anywhere you are that you create value for others.
Right.
And so that's pretty broad. That can be almost anything. It can be opening the door, as you're walking in the supermarket. I mean, so that's the second thing though, is find that place. And, that's what I was talking about planning before you retire, do some low cost probes at different places where you might plug in, whether it's, taking your grandson to sport events every, once a week or twice a month or something, or taking the family on a big vacation where you rent a house and you pass your values on to them because you got them captive for a week. That could be a context.
Hmm.
Serving on a board could be in context. Working in your current role. I know I
Hmm.
heard someone speak one time. I don't remember who this was. I have a good memory for stories, but I can never remember where I got them from.
Well, you're also extremely well read, certified. I mean, you walk the walk, talk the talk, continue to learn.
Well,
So
you flatter
you
me.
got a lot of stuff floating around up there, I'm sure.
Yeah. The story I was going to tell was about the context can be anywhere.
Hmm.
And so the key, I think, is that visions are aligned. Wherever you go, you want visions aligned. So the story, and I'm sure you've probably heard it, I think it was John F. Kennedy or a congressman or someone back in the 60s, was at NASA when it was in the early stages of NASA. And he was talking to the guy sweeping the floors. And he asked the guy sweeping the floors, he said, what is your job here? And he looked at him straight in the eye and he said, I'm just trying to get a man on the moon. I mean, this is the guy sweeping
Mm.
the floor said that. So,
Right.
so you find a context that's aligned with a vision that gets you excited. And again,
Yeah.
that could be a million
Yeah.
things. So,
Real quick question on a kind of side note tangent.
yeah,
We're talking about the context of retirement, right? Your second act or act two
right.
being, I'm going to leave my profession and go off to something else and try to find some meaningful work that adds value. But it feels like to me, I'm wondering if you get a sense of this as well, that people more and more often these days at a younger and younger age are waking up at 35 or 45 and saying, well, maybe I'm not in the right place. So they've got a lot of working years ahead of them. And it feels like a lot of what we're talking about today applies there as well. It doesn't have to be, I'm entering retirement for this second act, but it's trying to align myself a little bit earlier for the remainder of my working life. Do you get that at all in your practice?
Well, I mean, specifically, I mean, my hero is someone that's approaching the second
Hmm.
act or
Hmm.
recently in the second act. So we're designing act two, right?
Hmm.
That's imminent. It's either already started or it's imminent.
Right.
But we do work with a lot of our clients, adult children, and I like being a resource. I mentor a lot of young professionals that I just spend some time with. And
Hmm.
what I would say is I agree 100%. You ought to be, that context could be where you're showing up every day. I mean, you're working most of your life. You're spend more time at work than you do at home. And
Right.
so you want to feel like you're doing something that has value to the world.
Hmm.
And now you can do that a whole bunch of different ways, but just like the janitor sweeping the floor trying to get a man to the moon. But I think my counsel for the young professional is, you've got to play the long game.
Right.
And I think, so I'm a big Joseph Campbell fan. We talked about the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell's
Hmm.
work on the hero's journey and the power of myth. I mean, it's wonderful stuff on a
Hmm.
whole bunch of levels. But he has a phrase he always used: follow your bliss. Go follow your
Hmm.
bliss. And I think that's really good advice in the sense that you've got to find those things that give you, meaning and joy, and that you're excited about doing, because there's a bigger person. There's a purpose larger than yourself, right?
Hmm.
And again, that can be almost any industry. You can find something in that, even if it's just the relationships, that the impact you have on people. But the problem I have with it, I got this from Cal Newport writing.
I was just listening to a podcast
Oh,
with him on it the other day. Yeah.
he's great. He wrote Deep Work was probably his most popular book,
Hmm.
but he quotes Steve Martin in one of his books, I think, that says, "Be so good they can't ignore you."
Hmm.
So his philosophy is not so much follow your bliss. His philosophy for the young professional is to get in the game. Just get
Right.
in the game and be so good that they can't ignore you. And what gives you meaning and purpose will rise up over time.
Hmm.
But my counsel is do that and then play the long game. You do have to make strategic choices about your career.
I think it's interesting that guys like Cal Newport, Seth Godin is
Mhm.
another one that I've loved his work.
Yeah,
I mean, he created, marketing campaigns and email sales and things like that. I mean, he's prolific New York Times bestseller on work and productivity, right?
right.
And a lot of these influential people are getting to a point in their life where they're now reflecting back and starting to, it seems like, to talk much more often about purpose and meaning and the things that we're talking about today. So I just think that's an interesting kind of transformation that seems to take place.
Yeah, but there are seasons. I mean, it's not a direct flight from Act 1 to Act 2. There are some stopovers along the way. And each one of them is almost like the S curve that we talked about, the hero's journey S curve. Our life is a whole series of multiple S curves. And so I would tell this young professional, this may not be your career for life. And you're going to go through multiple of these. Learning is the first part where you go backwards, and then you build capability and you grow. And then you either stagnate or you start a new S curve, right? You find a new thing that gets you excited. Because if you don't stagnate, if you don't start the new S curve, and this is the danger, for the 50-year-old and the 55-year-old that's in a job that they don't like, they're making a bunch of money, they're tied to it because they need the money. They've got a bunch of, load, they got memberships and they got kids in college and they got parents that are there. So they need the job, but they're bored out of their brain. So the goal again is to start this new, what's the new thing that can get me excited? But I would say the same thing for the 35-year-old young professional that's in their first or second job is, keep exploring what is the new S curve where I can grow and be prepared to go backwards before you go forward. We all want instant gratification, including me. We want instant gratification, but in your career, sometimes you have to make tactical moves that look like you're going backwards to go forward.
Right.
But no, I think it's absolutely. These themes are universal, I believe.
Right.
Because I think it's part of our human condition and the way we're made. So again, I would just say that, I love Joseph Campbell's Follow Your Bliss. I also love the balance of that with Cal Newport's Get in the Game and Be So Good They Can't Ignore You. And it will arise because, I'm a different person at 60 than I was at 35. And I wrote about that in the book. I was trying to be a little transparent about how shallow I was as a 35-year-old, thinking that I was going to be the master of the financial universe.
Yeah, I kind of laughed when I read that because I bought the suits. Yeah, I bought the suits as well, and there were guys from New York City offices that would come out, and they had the tailors coming into the office to get you measured and kind of playing the part. So that was something I enjoyed.
Yeah, and then the final thing on the three things was the first one was core. Who are you? What do you care about? What brings you to your knees? What do you love and what gives you passion? Number two was about the stage. What is the context? And the third is kind of what you and I do professionally, partially is capacity. How do you create the margin? How do you create the resources to have the freedom to go do what you're called to do? And that can be financial resources. They can be energy and physical ability. It could be a lot of different things, but certainly it's time, money, and energy, and maybe some spiritual maturity as well. But that's sort of the final piece of it is you've got to create the financial resources so it gives you the freedom to go do what you're called to do without money being the issue. And that's the problem too with our clients who are worldly successful. And they can do anything they really want to do that matters to them, but they spend all day watching CNBC and worrying about things they have absolutely no control over. Not only do they worry about things they have no control over, oftentimes they worry about things that both they have no control over and that don't matter. So, it's one thing to worry about things that don't matter. That matter that you don't have control over. But to worry about things that don't matter that you don't have control over, that's even worse. So they get to this point where they've won the game, but they cannot enjoy it. And that's
and I think you do a great job of explaining the importance of capacity in the book. And we touched on this a few minutes ago of the employee that's at a certain age, they have a certain load, and now they are stuck. And that's a tough place to be for someone who maybe knows they're not in the right place, they're not following their bliss, they could find meaning and purpose somewhere else, but they feel like because they don't have the financial capacity to do so, they can't leave the current situation that they're in, right? And so that's why I think it's great to bring up that the financial capacity and the basic foundations of financial planning and doing the things you're supposed to be are so critical, because it gives you the ability, the flexibility, and the opportunity to make those choices for yourself. Right. And you're not forced to be in places you don't want to be.
Well, and I think our profession is getting better at this, but it's good to have advisors who give you permission to make less and be happier.
Right. Right.
Make less, work longer. It's something that's fulfilling, and be happier and enjoy the journey. So, our industry traditionally is all about saving, so you can ride the sailboat and see the whale jump in the ocean on the golf commercial, on Sunday afternoon, and save. So you get to do that at the end. I mean, why do you want to break rocks for 40 years and maybe get to do that? I mean, so maybe you should experience some of those things a little bit earlier and not toil for 40 years on things. So there is a balance. Clearly there is a balance, and it's good to have the type of advisor that gives you permission to do things that the world might think is crazy, but it's aligned with your heart.
That brings up another question I wanted to ask you, is this concept of enough. It comes up in the book, and it comes up often in conversations with clients. What are your thoughts on having enough, doing enough? It kind of, to me, ties into our last bit of the conversation. How do you think about what's enough, or how should listeners think about what's enough for them?
Well, I think the hardest part of that is we're social creatures. So we don't really define enough for ourselves. Again, this all kind of gets back to this walk in the woods, doesn't it? We don't clearly define enough for ourselves. We oftentimes let the pond we swim in define enough. So I think the hardest thing in today's world is not to play the comparison game. Remember what game you're playing and not what your neighbor's playing or what your brother's playing or what your parents played. It's your game, and figure out what your game really is, and define the enough uniquely for you, regardless of what anyone else thinks it should be. And uniquely for them, could be different as well. So I think that's the first thing, is just make sure it's your definition and not the world's or someone else's.
I think it's an interesting double-edged sword currently in the world that we live in, because on the one hand, I've learned a lot online through podcasts and through social media sometimes, and found books about purpose and meaning in the earlier part of our conversation. But within that, you're swimming through the sea of social comparison, which is what you're alluding to. So it's both, there's a lot of opportunity for folks to kind of wake up to the fact that we might be able to chase some bliss and listen to our heart and kind of chase those passions. And there are opportunities out there to do those things. But at the same time, you're being bombarded with content that of that pond and how my neighbor's living and my friends, and kind of living up to an expectation that the world puts on us. It's kind of an interesting time in that regard.
It is. And look, I mean, I'm guilty as charged, just like the next person. I mean, I'm subject to the same challenges to do that as everyone else, and I do it. I mean, I fall prey to the comparison game just like everyone else. But I think that's the thing. I do like, you'll probably help me with this. I do like, Shaping Wealth's, definition of happiness, the difference between, the equation, the happiness equation that they had, which partly speaks to enough, was reality minus expectations. And Arthur Brooks, that I quoted earlier, who the professor at Harvard and prolific writer as well. I mean, he had something similar about that, about managing your wants. So I think that's the thing. You've got to, the expectations management or want management is just as important as wealth management. If you look at your resources divided by what you want, we spend so much time focusing on, the top part of that equation, trying to grow it, when sometimes maybe we should work on the bottom part of the equation and wanting less. or
I think that's a great example. I'm glad you brought that
yeah,
up.
or
Yeah.
wanting the things that truly matter. I mean, that's the thing.
Right.
What truly matters? I mean, so if you value freedom, more than you value, the new car, or the second or third home, that might have an impact.
hmm
And
hmm
so, but if you buy the new car every 2 years and you've got the second or third home because you think it will give you joy, but you have no freedom because you got to work to pay for those things, or all you're doing is fixing screen doors at the beach when you're there anyway.
hmm
It just adds a lot of clutter to your life, but nothing wrong with those things. You just got to figure out where you are on the equation. So I don't have a good answer for you. I know.
It's a tough
Well, it is. I mean,
question, and it's
the
so.
Stoics have been working on this for thousands of years, and they're right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I think we ended up in a great place, though. The Arthur Book's equation, where it's resources divided by wants.
yeah, work on both
And you
sides.
have a
Work
whole,
on both sides.
right, work on both sides.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Exactly. And really think about what matters. So
yeah.
I know I threw a curveball existential question at you, and I think we ended up in a pretty good spot. So I
Okay.
appreciate you.
Yeah,
I appreciate you.
yeah,
Yeah. So, who we are at our core, the context in which we work, and then that capacity, those are kind of the three key
right.
concepts. Is there anything else you'd want to share with folks to kind of think about if they're relating to our conversation today?
Well, look, I would just say it's a journey. I mean, I
hmm
think that I mean, the first step about being clear on who you are solves so many problems. I know I had a coach once that helped us, identify all the all the things that we want to try to get done over the next quarter or year or 3 years or 5 years. And then he said, okay, let's go through those and figure out, are there some of them that if you do those, all these other ones will take care of themselves? He called them
hmm
drivers. So are there some of
hmm
these tactics or strategies or goals that if you did it, a lot of these other things would just take care of themselves? And I kind of think that's what the getting clear on who you are does for you. It simplifies a lot of these other things. Yeah, I
hmm
guess the final thing I would just say is on the capacity part is, I think that as wealth advisors, I mean, we've got a great opportunity to help people understand that it's not near as complicated in terms of the investment side of creating the income streams that they need.
hmm
But they do face, and I talk about this in the book, 6 really big challenges that are daunting, quite frankly. And so that's why wants management and expectations management may
hmm
be more important in the future than it's been, at least in the recent past. Now, I
Right.
have nothing to compare. I mean, if I was a 25-year-old individual in 1939, with World War II, coming at me,
Right.
I probably wouldn't think that we have a lot of challenges ahead of us. But
Right.
we do,
Right.
we do have challenges ahead of us in terms of the capacity for a whole
hmm
bunch of reasons. So there are some 6 and more, but 6 that I've identified in the book that you do have to address. And
hmm
but the investment part of it, the academic part of the investment part of it is greatly simplified, but the
hmm
behavior part is even more perilous because it's so
Right.
easy to blow yourself up. you know,
Right. Right. And again, it's another interesting point in time where technology is making things a lot easier. Managing money is as easy as it's ever been. And those tools that we use and consumers have access to themselves are going to continue to get
right,
better. But I think I agree with you that with that is going to come a lot of complexity and uncertainty and stress and overwhelm to kind of make it all work, right? So that human side and the behavior side is going to continue to be a much bigger part of, hopefully what we can help with, but certainly what clients will have to explore themselves, right?
right.
And be reflective and spend time with these things because it's going to become a bigger and bigger deal moving forward.
Well, and kind of what I was kind of alluding to behind, and you added to it was, look, I mean, the financial marketing would have you believe that free trading is the holy grail. You can
Mm,
trade for free, and yeah, so that's just an example of people worrying about things that don't matter,
Hmm.
because you shouldn't be trading. Really, I mean,
Right, right,
you shouldn't be trading at all, probably. You
right,
know,
right.
and
Yeah.
but things are so much better because I can trade on Robinhood for free.
Hmm. Yeah.
So anyway, so I think there's a great opportunity for us to continue to help people be uh, create the meaning and purpose for them. They've got to identify it for themselves, but help them create a platform to go there and help you create the financial means to go pursue it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. To wrap up again, I think you do a great job in the book, Jeff, of laying out the journey. You do a great job of explaining it's not a straight line. You describe it as these S curves or multiple series of S curves and starts and stops in your life. And I would just encourage people to take heed of the advice to spend some time with these things and really reflect on them because I think they're important and useful. So
Thank you.
we appreciate your time and expertise. Before I let you go, a couple final questions. We've talked about a lot, and you reference a ton of resources in the book. So we'll definitely unpack some of those and get those linked. And we have the code for the workbook. We've mentioned Arthur Brooks's book, which I have in my Audible queue and started, but haven't finished. I can't remember the name offhand. Do you call the
Well,
name?
he's got a bunch. His most recent one, I think, was one he co-authored with Oprah Winfrey.
Oprah, right?
And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
listening to that now. If you want a short version, I think you probably know the 10% Happier.
Yep.
I can't remember the name of the principal of 10% Happier, but he's got a podcast, and he had Arthur Brooks
Yeah,
on.
Sam Harris, I
Yeah,
think.
that sounds right. And
Yep.
he had Arthur Brooks on, and he teed up the themes of the book that are, I think, terrific. So if people want to find that podcast, I
Cool.
think that would be a good one to listen to with Arthur Brooks. And
I'll pull that
yeah,
out. We have a resource tab on the website for the podcast. We try to archive those things, so I'll put a bunch of those
yeah.
together. Is there anybody else? You mentioned Joseph Campbell. Anybody else that comes to mind that you would want to point people to? Books to check out, podcasts that you listen to that you think are useful. Anything else to spotlight for
Yeah,
folks?
well, first of all, I'll plug mine. I've got the Money and Meaning Journey, which is just a monthly show, so it's not every week, but we try to combine some of these topics with wealth management topics. So you can check that out at all the streaming. In terms of books, again, some of these are spiritual books. I read Bob Buford's Halftime, 25 years ago or so, and it did nothing for me. I read it about 10 years ago when I was turning 50, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. So
Hmm.
that's not a bad book if if you're a believer and you want a spiritual take. Another one similar to that I think even takes it further, which is really one of my favorite all time books, is one called Falling Upward by a Franciscan priest named Richard Rohr, and it talks about the S curve, essentially about finding your true self in the S curve. Morgan Housel's books are all both terrific.
Hmm.
The Psychology of Money, Daniel Crosby's book, The Behavioral Investor, I think is the one I like the best.
Hmm.
Is fantastic in terms of the behavioral mistakes we make with money. So I guess those are a few that I'm a very simple book in terms of behavior too. Is Nick Murray's Simple Wealth, Inevitable Wealth. It's a very short,
Hmm.
simple, easy book, but it's pretty good on trusting the capital markets. Some
Awesome.
say it's too simplistic, but I think it's just a lot of wisdom that's simple. So
Yeah.
those are a few that you might check
Great.
out.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And last question, this being a show about financial well-being and well-being in general, I like to ask people before I let them go, what are the things that you do, rituals you have, habits outside of writing books and hosting a podcast? And, what do you go back to that you feel like really helps you improve how you're feeling and your well-being overall?
Yeah, well, probably the most important thing is I have about an hour and sometimes a little bit more of personal worship time first thing in the morning, or quiet time, whatever you want to call it. And it's
Hmm.
I do meditate. I'm new to that, but prayer, meditation, just sitting quietly and listening, and So I think that's probably the most valuable hour of my day. I have been using the last, I think I'm on my 92nd day of the 10% Happier app,
Oh,
because I don't
cool.
know how to meditate. It's a 10-minute meditation and it's just guided. And so I'm
Yeah.
doing, every morning I do that. I'm very inconsistent with my physical maintenance, but I do 300 crunches and 75 push-ups every morning.
Good for you.
That I can't have breakfast till I do that. So I do, and that's pretty stupid, but I do it. And then I do something I learned many years ago as strategic coach. I try to finish every day with a positive focus. What are the three best things that happened that day? What are the best, and it could be personal, professional, it could be anything. So what are the three, and then what are the three things that I think are going to be the best things for the next day? It's just a good way
Yeah.
to kind of put a bow on the day. So those are little things I
Yeah.
guess I do.
That's great. That's great. And I think, it's interesting. Talk about prayer, meditation, quiet time. Those are really practical ways to implement, taking that walk in the
Right.
woods,
That's
right?
right.
Just carving out that space for yourself to kind of think about these things and consider them.
Yeah,
So
no question.
that's all great. Jeff, I really enjoyed the time. I think you're a really authentic, genuine guy. That's, again, doing great work and putting out great work that's really useful for folks. So it's really an honor for me to have you here and to kind of talk through the book and your practice and your thoughts on all these things. So thank you very much for being here. And thanks everybody for listening. Before I let you go, websites, social media accounts, the book name one more time. Where should people check out Jeff
Yeah, so the
Bernier?
book is The Money and Meaning Journey, A Guide to Clarity, Confidence, and Joy. And it's available everywhere on, online retailers. There's an audio version as well. And you could learn more about the book and me at jeffbernierauthor.com, as I mentioned before, where you can get those bonus things. The best way to learn about what I do professionally is just at tandemgrowth.com. That's our corporate website, and you can find more about my day job as a wealth advisor at tandemgrowth.com. I'm on LinkedIn. We do a little bit on Twitter and others, but LinkedIn's probably the one that has the easiest access. But at Tandem Growth, I can't remember, at Tandem Growth, I think is the best one at Twitter, I believe. But
Cool.
that's probably the easiest place. We're
That's
not
great.
terribly hard to find if you Google Tandem Growth Financial Advisors.
Great. Great. Yeah. And there's a lot of great resources right on the website that you guys put out, which is great. So I encourage people to visit you there and check out the book, check out the podcast and connect with Jeff. Again, thanks so much for being here. This is really, it was a pleasure to have you. And it was a cool experience again, going back to being, you're the first BTBA alum to connect with on the podcast. So that's in and of itself a pretty cool experience for me. So I appreciate
Well, it
it.
was my pleasure. A lot of fun.
All right. We'll see you next
Take
time.
care.